Hello and welcome to another video on this channel in which we're going to talk about REST and GraphQL. I want to share with you what GraphQL does compared to REST and in which cases it might be a good choice. To be honest, in the past, whenever I worked on full stack projects, most of the time REST was enough for that, because most of the time what I wanted to do was simple CRUD operations, so creating, reading, updating and deleting elements somewhere in a database or communicating with another backend and retrieving data from there. And this was usually a very linear exchange. So getting a data set, displaying it, have the user select something, getting another data set, and so on. Now, recently I've been learning GraphQL because I wanted to extend my knowledge a bit. So I built a little demo, which I want to share with you now. And I built this demo in a way that it's easy to compare how REST would do things versus how GraphQL would do things. And we're now going to look at an exact use case, because looking at some use case is the easiest way to understand. Also, if you're not familiar with GraphQL at all, the official documentation is very helpful. It shows you how typical requests look. And then if you want to implement the server side, Apollo Server is a very good way to do that. It's very simple. And it's also what I use in the demo, which I show you. The demo, which I called Apollo GraphQL demo, is available on my GitHub. So I'll leave a link to it in the description so you can browse through the complete source code. Also made sure to make it very descriptive, so we have a simple React frontend which is just there to showcase how you could request data from GraphQL servers via simple fetch operations, but the real important parts are here under services middleware. And here it's organized into different folders. So I have a source folder where we have a data folder, which contains the implementation of the database. So I have two versions here, which we're gonna go through if you're interested in another video. So we can start the server with just a memory database or using Postgres. Then we have a GraphQL folder, which contains all the code for making requests to the GraphQL API. Then we have a REST folder, which contains our REST API endpoints and their implementation. And then also a tools folder where I implemented a little wrapper around Postgres. So just a little abstraction layer, which makes it easier to use Postgres. And also down here is a test, which contains some integration tests for the GraphQL part. So this whole project, you could use it as some boilerplate to get started with GraphQL or even with REST. It's written in a way that it's simple and can help you to understand how everything works. Now let's look at the concrete use case, which I want to use to exemplify how REST works versus GraphQL. So we're here in Visual Studio Code and you see my server here is running and I've already used it a bit. So we get some logouts whenever I make requests or queries to the database. I also, again, you might know this already from my previous videos, have a dev container, and inside of this dev container I have a few extensions. One extension which I like a lot is Postman. So Postman is a great tool for testing REST APIs, and you can even use it to interact with GraphQL. And there's a plugin for Visual Studio Code which I use here. And I have a few requests to this server here. But first I can also just show you in the browser the simple REST endpoint I have. So you see under localhost 4000, which is where my server is running, I have an endpoint, a REST endpoint, which is called users. And when I do a simple get here, I just get an array of user elements. Those are very simple. It's just to show you some data. You could think of a user database where we have a name, a surname, some nickname, an age, which is optional. So sometimes it's just null. The users also have an ID. And down here, we have a string containing a list of friends. So those are IDs referencing other users here. And this is essential because this is later the part where GraphQL might be interesting. Now to use Postman, let's just also do what we just did in the browser. So we do click here on my GET request, which I've saved here in a collection, and we just do a GET to HTTPS localhost 4000 users, the same which I just did in the browser. And you see here, I get this whole list. There's also down here post request, which I can execute to add users. So here in this case, provide a body. So let's just use some name, for example, Brad, and I just leave the surname as a whatever, it doesn't matter. I can give an age if I want, then I can send a post, and here we get back the created user, which now also has an ID. And you see also again here this friends array which is null because this user is new, doesn't have any friends yet. So remembering this ID, what we can do now, we can have this user make some friends. So let's go to our put request here. So put's usually used to update a data set, and I want to update user 8 and provide him with a new friend, and the friend is passed in the body. If you remember, first when we do the get users, we get all this list of users. So here, for example, we have John with the ID 2, we have Albert with 3. Let's just say we want to have our new user Brad become friends with John. So we provide number 2 here. And then again, we send. And if we go back and get the whole users list, send it again. You see, if we scroll down, you see that in here somewhere we have Brad and he's friends with ID number 2. And if we go to ID number 2, we see he has more friends already. But here's also ID number 8, which is Brad. So that's the way how we can create users, query the list of users, make friends, typical REST operations. Okay, so now let's imagine this John here is logged into our system. Yeah, the user's created and John has made some friends. And we see here currently has 3 friends. Now we want to simply display those 3 friends. So since we already have this whole list, that's an easy operation because now we could do this just in the front end, holding a copy of this array in the front end, searching it for the different IDs, and then displaying the different friends that John has with all their details. But what if we don't always want to get this whole list of users? Because this whole list of users could get very long. Just imagine you have 1,000 users or even more. So you wouldn't just want to use this users endpoint here and get the whole list, then store it in the memory in the front end just to figure out which friends you have. For example, if you are John with the ID 2, to figure out what your friends are, you don't want to get the whole list of users. If you already have access to this individual element, which is also possible via a GET request, so you could just do localhost for 1,000 users and then here supply the ID, send. Now you directly get access just to John. But now if you want to see who his friends are, you need to next do a request to number 1, then to number 2, and I think it was also number 8. So you have 4 requests to get the whole group of friends here, which is not ideal, especially the bigger the groups of friends are. And maybe you want to then also know who the second degree friends are, so the friends of a friend, so to say. So this way, this can get very complex with REST because you do a lot of requests or you get a lot of data in a single request. And this is where GraphQL can help you. And I now want to show you how you could do such a request in GraphQL. And this will make it very clear where GraphQL can help you. So with the server here running, I have access to a demo page, which is served by Apollo. This Apollo server playground, you see it's currently connected to my GraphQL endpoint. And I already have here a little GraphQL query. So it's a user's query, which I've defined in my middleware. And I'm interested in the users, which is the whole list of users. So let's first do this because let's remove this part here. This is corresponding to what we had before. So we have the name, the surname, the age, the nick, and the friends. And you see, when I put in the friends, it directly opens up an object because here with GraphQL, this friends is not just a list of strings. No, it's basically referencing other nodes, other data sets. And in this case, friends again has IDs and name. So if I make this request, I also get this whole list, and you could say, oh, well, it's also a big data set if we have thousands of users. Well, this would obviously blow up the whole communication, but stay with me one more second. So first of all, you see here, we have all those objects, but instead of just having a string, what we have now here, objects with the data we requested, so the ID and the name. So let's just go to Brad or here John, which was the person we were interested in. And he has 3 friends and they're directly listed here. The beauty now comes from the possibility to create queries here for a specific user. And in our case, we wanted to know John and his friends. So we provide the ID, which is 2. And if we make this request, then we get with just 1 request what before would have needed 4 requests. So we get the data about John and his friends. So let's just say, okay, for John, we also want the ID. We don't need the nick. And also for his friends, we want to also have the surname. Do the request again, and we get nicely structured data. If you're also interested in the friends of the friends, so the friends, I don't know how to call it. Yeah, you can go even deeper here. And let's see, yeah, we also want the name and the surname. So this way, you're building a real graph between different elements, and you can go deeper and deeper. Now, imagine you had even more complex data. So not just friends, relations, but maybe referencing data in some other databases even. Then with GraphQL, you can't link those by providing proper resolvers, which is how those results are built on the middleware side. And you can see this when you explore my code. But in this video, I just wanted to provide you a simple comparison between REST and GraphQL so you understand where you might want to use GraphQL versus REST. So I wouldn't say you should now always go ahead and use GraphQL because it also makes some things more complicated. First, you can always start with REST and see how far you get. And if you design your code right with the right abstractions, then moving between the two is also not that difficult as you see in my code. There's another thing I want to mention, which is possible out of the box with GraphQL. And this also distinguishes it from REST because, let's go back here. You see down here we have subscriptions. And a subscription basically creates a continuous WebSocket connection between the front end and your middleware and listens for events, which you can define. For example, here I have a subscription user created. And whenever the user is created, I want to get his ID or her ID, the name, and let's say also the surname. And now I can just add the subscription here. And down here, this is like the REST endpoint for adding a user. And let's just also create a new one here. Let's make it Johnny B or whatever. And now let's add the user. And you see down here in the subscription, I get the same data here. So first, the response from adding the user, add user, ID and name as I defined here. And down here in my subscription, which could be some kind of asynchronous listener in the front end, I get this data here. User created with the exact data I defined here. So this can be very helpful, and this is something you don't get out of the box with REST. So with REST, often what you do, if you are listening to data that is changing, you do some polling. There's also a possibility to create a streaming HTTP connection, which you keep open. But yeah, this is usually a little cumbersome. And what you could do also, like here, have a WebSocket server for this part. But yeah, with Apollo server, this is all nicely integrated and already set up for you if you put the pieces together. So that's another thing where GraphQL makes things very easy. Okay, so far so good. This was just a first overview. Let me know if you found this interesting, if it helped you to understand the differences and the benefits of GraphQL versus REST, where you could use it, where it could be interesting. Make sure to look at my code and let me know if you want to have additional videos where we look at more of the implementation part. I can give you some walkthrough, show you some best practices, stuff I've figured out, and we can continue this learning journey together. Just leave a comment if you're interested in that. Don't forget, leave a thumbs up, and yeah, see you in the next video. Bye.